but short of a title, a new title has emerged last night, Tuning into the Magic of Ourselves and Life, Even Far Beyond Our Knowing. What I'm going to be speaking about really comes from my own life experience and in working with my clients. Cell memory in tandem with our creative cycles of the brain plasticity, and along with the breath, provide us with a truly amazing inner resource to heal, develop creatively, and to realize our life promise and potential and our purpose. Cell memory and the fullness of connection to others unknown and to the infinite of our world universe has always been, but it's neuroscience that has made the workings of it all understandable to neuroscientists, and it's a potent working tool, really simple to use by everybody with no knowledge of neuroscience whatsoever. So myself, I know next to little about neuroscience, but how I've learned about it has really been brought about a fantastic development in the psychotherapy I do. And instead of referring to textbooks or whatever is much, much more fluid, where the answers that people are seeking to either overcome difficulty or to develop creatively come from within them and not from me. I just facilitate their process using their innate creative processing, using the tissue memory. We can heal ourselves mentally, emotionally, and physically, and optimize our immune system, live longer with less illness right to the end of life. We can increase our intelligence and creativity and be active almost right up to the end of bodily life. Self-memory in the main part starts at the moment of conception, but it also appears to go back very much further. Before I was doing this particular kind of psychotherapy, I was doing hypnotherapy, and that was fine. And as part of that, I had a client who was really quite loud, quite difficult, quite intimidating. And I don't think it was only me that felt that. It was fairly general. His presence was loud all around. But he was stuck in his life. I'd been reading about Schauberger, who was from generations of Austrian foresters up in the mountains. And his observation of nature was something very different. And what he noticed in particular was that fish in the river, in very cold water, held their position for hours on end, where they were in front of a stone in the river and not behind it. And he wondered, what was this? And he also observed in dark, moonless nights in particular, that boulders would lift up from the bottom of the river and float on the surface. And the diameter of, or the ratio of length to width of the boulder was that of an egg, 9 to 5 or thereabouts. And so he developed this hypothesis that nature generated energy out of itself. It didn't use up resources and it didn't pollute. But what was fascinating was how he developed further his observations of the fish. He got some assistants to put some buckets of hot water in the river about 1 kilometer away, roughly. And as soon as that water reached where the fish was holding, the fish was flushed downstream and didn't recover its position for 24 hours. So you can imagine the dilution of warm water in about 1 kilometer of river. So what he realized that was the fish was getting its energy not from heat, but from the cold. And the colder the water, the more energy the fish had. So with this particular client that I was talking about earlier, I just been reading this book. So under hypnosis, I asked him to become a fish in a river and to describe himself. And he described himself as a catfish, not very pleasant, with a whole growth of slime over him. So I asked him to move closer to the current. He was in a pond, a backwater of the river. So I asked him to move into the current and to say where he could feel the current and he could feel the coldness of the water. And he said, "Oh, I've changed into a salmon, and the skin is all shiny." So I asked him again to move further into the stream, and the current was getting stronger. And I asked him how did he feel? And he said, "Oh, great, he's getting more energy." So I told him the water was now getting colder and running faster. "Tell me how things go." And he says, "Gavin, my shoulders, they're expletive freezing." I said, "But what about your energy?" He says, "Oh, I've got more energy." So he really seemed to shift in his sense of himself from a person who was stuck into a person who was going forward. So the next two clients of the day, they got put in the river as well. And I got the same result, that they were all energized by the coldness of the water. And it really made me think, well, where is this coming from? 3 clients put in the cold stream of the river, and they all transform. They're all energized. Where does this come from? And what I thought is it's coming from the memory that we carry in our DNA through the early evolution of mankind from when we were fish in the river. I don't know whether that's right or not, but it seems to be the case. So and again, in working with clients, a lot happens from their very early life. But first of all, I better cover how tissue memory, the first cell at conception, contains our life promise, all the information about who we can be, who we are, where we can go in our life. And as that first cell divides and divides again, and eventually the fetus forms, then it's the same information of who we are that is in every cell of our body as it divides and divides until the child is born, and then thereafter the child grows, repeating the same information, and in becoming adult, we're renewing ourselves every 7 to 9 years, whereby we still have access to our original life promise at that first cell at conception. So long before the brain memory develops, we have the memories of what is happening round about us. And so in therapy, it's possible to go back into what happened in the course of gestation. Was the child wanted? Were the parents happy together? Did one parent want the child, the other not? Did they both want the child? And that is known to the fetus very early in life. There's an example that I read some time ago. My screen's gone blank, so I'm not sure what's happened here. I hope you can Can you still see me, hear me?
No, can hear you. Can hear you.
Yeah, well, that's fine. Damien's sorting out. Oops. So there was a young child who had a lot of behavioral issues, and they couldn't find out what was the cause of it. And he could speak strange languages, and he knew an awful lot of swear words, and nobody had an explanation for it. And the medical team, or the psychiatrist, whoever it was that was dealing with him, made this comment to the mother that this child was swearing and could speak seemingly in Latin. And the mother revealed that at birth, it was a very difficult birth, and the life of the child was in real danger. And a priest was called who gave last rites in Latin. And also the swearing was coming from the medical team who were trying to bring this child into life. So this child, at the point of entering into life, already knew how to swear and could speak Latin. So it's quite amazing just how attuned we are to our surroundings, and particularly in times of crisis and trauma, we are particularly sensitive to what happens to us and what is going on round about us. And through the tissue memory, which is most accessible in the hands, where 20% of the brain is given over to the hands, that is the easiest part of the body to converse with when exploring whatever the challenge in life, whether it's good or whether it's bad, whether it's difficult. But we can use the creative cycles of the mind in our everyday to deal with any challenge that comes our way. We can work through it. And so the creative cycle that we have, the ultradian cycle, runs for 90 minutes every 2 hours, 24 hours a day. So the short-term memory is not very efficient. So we need to take a break of 20 minutes every 2 hours for our mind to work, our brain to work efficiently. If we don't do that, we get stressed. The short-term memories is not very good for holding memories for any length of time. So at night, in the slow wave sleep, the experience of the day that matters in our life, even the finest detail which matters, that's affected us positively or negatively, is passed over and buffered over in the long term, in the slow wave sleep, to the long-term memory. And then when we dream, that information is compressed into the long-term memory for recall at any time. So if we are feeling down, or we have issues in our life, we're not fully active in our life, then we can go to our tissue memory to find out what is actually going wrong and to find the answers from the resources of who we really are that come to us initially in that first cell of conception. It's alive in us. Our potential for life and all our capacities is available to us right through life until just before we go. It's no longer the view that we go downhill mentally in our mental facility after 20, but we can increase our intelligence right through life by there's a range of things which I'll just read out when I find them, because I always forget what they are, but I will find them. Yes, sorry, that's a bit wooden and flicking through the pages. But what we need in our life to really feel alive and to use the potential that's given us is we have to be active. Human beings are designed to be active. We're not designed to be passive, watching television, sitting on computer screens all day, absorbing other people's stuff. We need to be active in developing our life and knowing who we really are. And for that, we need truth is the most important. However difficult truth is, it is what we can work with. If we shy away from the truth, then we're not really dealing with life as we know it and have experienced it. We need novelty, beauty, challenge, good and difficult, a belief of any kind, creativity, wonder, nature experience, meditation, exercise, and authenticity. All these things, they increase our gene expression, and that's when we are more live, when we feel more live and we're in touch with our life. So I just go back. Sorry, I've lost the track there a little bit, but if I can just pick up on things. Yes, the creative cycles. That's where I was. Running for 24 hours, short-term memory. When asleep. I've covered that and that. How we tune into our creative mind is through dreams. If you can remember your dreams, they are at the apex of the creative processing of the previous day. So that's good. If you can remember your dreams, it's metaphorical and symbolic. But if you ponder over them, you will get the sense of the solutions and the way forward that has been given to you by your innate creative processing. The next thing, if you don't remember your dreams, or if you don't understand them, is to pick up on the mood of them. Are they lifting you up or taking you down? Because we're all part of nature, and nature and our conscious mind is always trying to bring us back into balance. So the other way of picking up is our waking thoughts. If you have an hour in the morning to lie or just sit quietly, or when you're in the shower, the new thoughts of your creative processing will come to you. And also in the 20-minute breaks you take through the day when you're relaxing. These are the new thoughts, not the vicious circles of thoughts which condemn you or limit you, where you see all the difficulties, but the ones which are really rooting for you, the ones that want you to realize your life and be fulfilled. Using your innate creative processing enables and empowers you to work through every challenge which comes your way. Brings you your own answers which are right for you, developing stronger identity in self. No need to conform, rebel, or protest. You are comfortable in yourself and your outer world, and you come from within. It's absolutely fantastic for creativity in every aspect of life. Feeling alive is the fuel for life. Creative cycles, if you don't get the way through within one session, or within one cycle, then your creative cycles will work in background through the day, through the week, through the month and through the years even. So if you're working on a theme of developing your life and you're tuned into how to work with your creative cycles, you will get all the direction for your life going forward, the solutions of daily problems, things you can't work out. But it doesn't come for free. You have to put in that active effort. Without that effort, don't expect your creative cycles to give you anything because you're being passive. So we are designed to be active, and we need to be active one way or another, develop interests that excite us, because these are the ones that relate to us. And you find out who you are. So the stages of the creative cycle, first of all, you become aware of a challenge. It's maybe in an everyday situation that can come along where perhaps you feel uncomfortable, you don't have the answer, or you've got a task to do and you don't know how to do it. So the second stage is really to explore what is the basis of why I'm either stuck or not sure how to go forward. Because creativity is about new life. It's not about dead old life. So we don't know the answers which are going to take us through. So the next stage of the creative cycle is not knowing. And when we don't know, we can feel that we're not functioning. We can feel depressed even. So when people are depressed, it may be that there's nothing really wrong. It's a natural stage of the rhythm of our creativity. And then comes the stage of illumination, where suddenly, out of the darkness of not knowing, but applying ourselves, leaning into a sense that there's an answer coming to us, or there's a way through, we get the insight, the illumination, and we know our way forward. And then we have to put that into practice. In working with people, what happens usually in a session, the client might be a bit tense, a bit anxious, things are maybe a bit difficult, the things that are worrying them. And they work with their hands. I'll just demonstrate what happens, because it's almost, with new clients, the most difficult thing I have is how they actually work with their creative memory. Basically, because it's active, you hold your hands up 6 to 8 inches apart roughly. Close your eyes and tune into the sensitivity of how your hands are responding to the particular question that you have, your challenge. Part of your hand might feel warm, part cold, part numb, part tingling. And this is because we live by experience of our senses and not by our thoughts. The thoughts follow on the experience. This is how our tissue memory knows how it understands the issue or the memory long past that is causing a blockage or a difficulty. So one hand will do an exploration of what is the challenge, what is the underlying nature of the challenge, not the obvious or the symptom, but what is underlying that challenge. And once enough of that is found out, then the other hand cuts in to receive from the tissue memory, from the resources of the tissue memory, of that life promise that you were given, what you can bring to bear to bring things into balance. And as that happens, usually there's memories often going very far back, and the arms move around. Some people have very big movements, other people it's small, but in tuning in to the movements, you can get an idea of what's going on. Often it's the left brain that's blocking the creativity. And when things come into balance, the right brain then supports the left brain in its creativity instead of blocking it. But as we grow up, in the late 60s, I read an article in newspaper of a study by educational psychologists, where they took the starting point of creativity as being at birth, where the child was curious about life and was exploring. And so they took 100% of that from the tools they've developed at that stage. And on entering school, any child was down to 25% of their innate creativity. And when they came out of the education system, at any point, most people were down to 2%, with very, very few people, the exception reaching to 5%. So this is what the stress of life, the stress of family does to us. It flattens our creativity. We lose the sense of our capacities, of who we are and what we can do. We do our best to survive, to fit in, but we're not actually serving ourselves particularly well. But if we know how to use our creative mind, then we can recover all of that and then have and it's what's called the growing edge of the brain, where we are actually able to move forward in our life and have a really very good life, optimizing the immune system. And strange numbers appearing on the screen, so it's a little bit putting me off, but putting me off my stride because I'm not sure if I'm causing it.
No.
So so we've covered that, right. So I did sort of list before the things which are really important to feeling alive. And a novelty of any kind, and any of that list that I read out. What happens when we're faced with novelty and a challenge is that within 20 minutes, we have new cells growing in the brain. And these take 3 weeks to mature. And if it's in terms of something which is a positive developmental, then there's new neurons, there's new connections throughout the brain to support the new insights which are coming through the creative cycles that we are working with. So if there's been a self-limiting destructive pattern, what has triggered that with the insight that comes through therapy, then after 3 months, then what triggered the negative pattern now triggers the positive pattern. And the brain structure which supported the negative pattern is no longer being used, atrophies and disappears. So the forward movement in our sense of ourself and in our capacities and in our empowerment is permanent. So it goes on and on through life, where we can increase our capacities, our sense of life, our sense of ourselves, our sense of identity. We have 200 genes, apparently, which are there only for the purpose of adaptation. So when a young child doesn't experience the love and nurturing consistently that it needs to grow in confidence and gain a good sense of itself and identity in life, then these 200 genes cut in to find the best place for survival. And so that is when we start to restrict ourselves, to tense up. So, and it's then also when we determine our life strategies round about the age of 3.5, 4, thereabouts. So most people carry on with their life strategies, usually which are developed out of fear, and will go through life. And it's later in life that the lack of growth and the development hits them. And that's where they find that they're in difficulty and seek help. They might be in jail, using their creativity in a negative way, but they might be doing interesting things, but under a lot of stress, because deep down, they don't feel good about themselves, because perhaps they've learned to feel that their treasures, their gems that they present to those around them when they're very small have been just cast aside as being worthless. An extremely painful process for a young soul. So it is these things, these same 200 genes, which then where we have a creative developmental purpose that come into play to correct our gene inheritance to the true of who we really are. And there's nothing that is really beyond anyone that isn't way beyond their expectations. Because remember, most of us have been knocked down to 2% of our potential by conforming to the system of parents, teachers, and the pressures of the world of every kind, financial, social, work, which hound us. But it's through these difficulties that we develop compensatory creativity, which when we do reach to ourselves, adds into that innate creativity we had at the outset. So difficulties, if you don't have difficulties, you're not going to have the life that you could have. They actually add. And because it's been hard won, what we then gain in life, it is far better value than it would have been otherwise. Also coming into play in brain plasticity is what I've been talking about, with the brain expanding and altering so it responds in new ways, healthy ways, are what are known as mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons have only been known about for 20 years or so. They're really quite recent. But if we are working on a task, a challenge of any kind, then without knowing it, we're actually sending out what we are doing to others and receiving from others who are engaged in similar activities anywhere on the globe. So you have research which is published within weeks of each other from different places around the globe, because we're all tuning in. Apparently, it's how tits know how to get the cream out of milk bottles from one end of the country to the other end of the country within just a few days. So there's an immense wonder of things we don't really understand, but we are connected, when we know it or not, to those round about us and those far away who we don't even know their names or their existence. So, but what really matters, well, I go back to working in therapy. It's empathy is what facilitates mirror neuron activity. And mirror neurons are related to motor neurons and can invoke stem cells to heal what has been damaged in our body. And Ernest Rossi, who developed this method that I base my work on, he was working with an Italian doctor who'd been bedbound for 2.5 years. And all his body muscles were wasted, his legs and so on. And within half an hour of Rossi working with him, he could feel his muscles regenerating, and he recovered. Rossi healed using his own methods, recovered from a stroke, a pretty bad stroke where he was down to about 38% of his brain function, and within a relatively short time, he got up to somewhere in the mid-90s, I think it was. I'm not quite certain about it. So these mirror neurons and the healing capacity of mirror neurons in conjunction with the creative cycles will heal us mentally, physically, and emotionally. So also the discoveries, creative developments, social developments, new thinking, shared with unknowns around the globe, the power of meditation or prayer, building connections and strengths of movements to bring about progressive change to the benefit of mankind. And at the moment, we seem to have a battle reflected in governments in the UK and America, where there's a real struggle of where the old holding on to power through trying to impose that on others. But the new life is irrepressible if people only knew that they could bring about change by doing what they are really interested in, where they connect with others, they attract these people to them, and they're attracted to people who are all bringing about change. So it doesn't matter how hard a clench that governments have on people. We, each of us, and together, we have the power to bring about change which will liberate us and take us forward in awareness, consciousness, and activity in terms of what has gone before. So, in a way, you could say that we live in a beehive world where we're all important. We all have our part to play. If we write ourselves off, we're complicit in the power situation that is dead, has gone before, has had its time, and needs to change. So the people who tend to bring about change are those who are least able to fit in, who maybe from early childhood felt they weren't welcome in their home, or else they didn't get the attention because the parents were focused on other things which harassed them, so that they withdraw. The hurt child will withdraw. So these people don't feel comfortable in the world, and I include myself in that group of people. And instead, we find ways which are not going to be open to the majority of the mainstream, where we find things which excite us, and where we can then, in relative safety, explore and develop. And that is where new ideas arise. And in terms of people who have made the breakthroughs which have taken civilizations forward, often their loners have had difficult backgrounds, particularly in psychotherapy, analysis, all that sort of thing. A lot of the people who make the biggest breakthroughs are those that have had the most difficult way through in life, usually from birth, but in terms of the attitudes and outlooks of those around them, making them feel uncomfortable in life and really out of the mainstream. So often these people even struggle to value what it is they're finding. So it's never easy to grow in life because we have to discard what we no longer need and to go into unknown territory where we can find things which really excite us and where we can pick up again on our life promise. So in a way, if we've had difficulties in life, and I would say for myself that it wasn't just 2% that I was at, I would say I probably struggled to be 0.5%. And it has taken me years and years where I have been supported. At the end, I'll make a mention of those who have supported me. But the compensatory aspect of having challenge and feeling out of it brings the move forward that mainstream life misses out on. And though I would say that those that don't have a good level of challenge and difficulty in their life are really missing out, because that's where the interest and the excitement relative to each of us grows. So, page 4, a blank page here, page 5, that's fine, carry on. Cover that. Covered that. Yes, what is also quite stunning in terms of using tissue memory in the creative cycles of the brain are the outcomes. I've had some absolutely amazing outcomes from even single sessions. You don't even need to speak the language. You don't even need to know what the person's challenge or trauma is. If it's something that would be distressing to tell, as would happen in conventional psychotherapy, they don't need to tell it. And I have had that come to me in the first session that I did just after learning about using tissue memory. Somebody spontaneous who couldn't speak of something which had been making her life so difficult for 6 months and was really causing her real grief. She also had quite severe back pain, which was making it difficult to drive. And within the first session of working with this method, where I hardly knew the bones of it to put together, this person spontaneously lost her pain and could talk about what she was unable to speak about. Heather and I were in Spain some years back, and we were meant to see some friends who had moved out to set up a Buddhist center in the Sierra Nevada. But they weren't at the bus station. And it was the 30th of April. And in Spain, May Day is May Day. And if you don't have accommodation, and if you're standing in a bus station without a phone number or any means of contact with those that you're picking you up, we had to do something. So we took the bus back into Granada and went to the hostel that we're booked into later to see if they could put us up even on the roof. And I asked about their children because we'd been to this hostel before, and they said they didn't have children. And I just said, well, perhaps we can maybe do something to help you with the therapies that we know. Heather did some breathing with the woman who's the wife of the person who was running the hostel. He was highly stressed, all the commercial pressures and worries, and he was burdening his wife. So she didn't speak English and I didn't speak Spanish. she had a smattering of English, and things worked through. And what happens at the end of a therapeutic cycle in general, most of the times, there's a fantastic smile breaks out across the face, and the whole body language relaxes as they have the insight which is taking them through. So that's what happened. I worked with the husband afterwards. He spoke English. He was a Swede, and he spoke very good English and was a very smooth talker. And he says, oh yes, oh yes. And I thought, yes, this is not right. But then in his working with his hands, and he understood that he was too wrapped up in the business, too consumed by the fear of things going wrong, and that what he needed to do was to draw. But how they were both coping in the meantime was they both smoked very heavily. But he said to me, there's somebody that they know who also happened to work in the same hostel, who is a walking psychological mess from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And would I help him? And this particular man, as we were moving around Granada, he'd obviously seen who we were. He approached me 3 times. Would I work with him? So the next day I worked with him. He had reasonable English, and he was a man who had never for a moment in his life felt good about himself. He was the black sheep of the family. He'd fallen out with his partner, fallen out with his mother and his siblings, and he had panic attacks from the start of the day to the end of the day. And the way he dealt with these was to drink at every possible turn. So there was somebody else, but I'll not cover that. We were back there a year later, and the couple had stopped smoking. He was drawing. He was going to show me his drawings, but they didn't do it because they had both sets of parents with them. But Heather told me that the woman had said that she was pregnant. So that they were relaxed, not smoking, and they'd been able to conceive, apparently. The man who had the panic attacks and was the black sheep of the family, when the smile came across his face in the first session, for the first time in his life, he saw himself as a good person who could have a good life and could help others have a good life. So in meeting up with him a year later, he had, after that first session with me, he'd stopped drinking. And through the 12 months, he'd been reducing his panic attack medication.
Bill, that's the phone.
So that, and he was now speaking to all the people that he wasn't speaking to before. And he'd met up with his father and was getting on great. So his life had totally transformed, and the couple's lives had totally transformed from just one session, and where the language was a bit iffy. That particular time, the second time going back and finding out about that, I was suffering from pneumonia and really struggling. And I was up on the roof terrace, and Heather brought a couple, beckoned me over. She was speaking to a couple from Austria. He spoke good English, and she didn't speak any, and I don't speak any German. But the issue was that she couldn't stop smoking. She tried so many times. Her husband, a traffic policeman from outside Innsbruck, he couldn't stand smoking, and he was desperate to get his wife to stop smoking. So we explained a bit about tissue memory, translated by the husband, and I started working with her, where he was, as I think I already said, the interpreter. And within 5 to 10 minutes, she knew why it was she hadn't been able to stop smoking, and didn't want to go any further because she absolutely felt that this time she would be able to stop smoking. So, and then also in terms of what I've been saying earlier about how people didn't need to speak about a subject which was difficult for them. I had somebody who'd been sexually abused who felt that if he didn't have another session immediately, he would end up in the psychiatric hospital. When he came, he bottled it up. And I said to him, you don't need to talk about it. Just go into your hands and work through what it is. And he was talking as he did so. So I picked up a bit about what it was. And he found his way through that extremely difficult situation. So also, if you have people who have experienced rape, women who have experienced rape, they don't need to talk about it. And they can work through. But relatively, it's a handful of people who will do it in one session, work through whatever is their challenge. But in terms of people looking for a longer term, in-depth development and seeking of self-knowledge and empowerment is fantastic. And I see people just once a month. That's all it takes because of the background working of the creative cycles, which have been set off and are working on things. And when I look at the notes for the next session in 4 weeks' time, when I start up, I find that the client has already reached the point that I thought I was leading them to. So it is immensely powerful, so much more powerful than what I was doing previously, working in psychotherapy. So yes, I've covered a lot of what it was. So what I will just briefly say, I'm looking for page 7. And page 7. What was a page 7 here? Yes, there's a page 7 here. I have made reference to the fact that I myself was extremely damaged as a child, and how I was really my own creativity, I would reckon, because I was so inhibited and so timid and so petrified of life, it couldn't have been more than 0.5%. So from where I am now, in terms of my journey, I have the greatest gratitude to 2 Margarets who in dream-based therapy patiently millimetered me over 7 years out of extreme fearful withdrawal and isolation to tentatively starting out in life. There was a range of good people who appeared at times of crisis as I stumbled forward on my path, a load of synchronicities and barrow loads of dreams. And more recently to Heather, who has introduced me so much that has been offbeat and counter to my professional architectural training and practice, but which has morphed into my being and vastly broadened my outlook. To Anne Shearer, for her pioneering and invaluable work in breathing, from which I've benefited a lot myself. And to Dr. Ernest Rossi, whose pioneering psychosocial, biological, tissue memory, creative cycle method of therapy suits me to a T in terms of its creativity, fluidity, and flexibility. It seems to work with amazing depth of reach with everything that has been presented to me as a psychotherapist. I first met Rossi in a dream 7 years earlier, as he was the black beret-wearing leader of a group of Chagall dancers reaching up a spiral stair at Plusgarden Abbey to surround me, when then Rossi, looking intently at me, directed me to a new life forward to work with Heather. I was soon to lose everything that I had built up over 20 years of physical and creative endeavor, stress and a stunning level of challenge and extreme difficulties repeatedly taking me to the edge. In the end, I would lose all at once my home and studio, architectural practice, marriage, and family in my daily life. I would then live alone on benefits for around 3 years in a cool, damp hovel beneath a hill with 2 stone circles and a recumbent standing stone. My dowsing rods wove me through the stones, and returning to my hovel, reached out as I went down the road to a number of stone circles, both to the north and the south. I then, with my interest with unusual workings of my rods, which I'd only used previously for finding drains, and I read up about energy lines, and then followed them with my rods from the corner of the churchyard diagonally opposite me, which was from the 7th century originally. The energy lines reached across to the front corner of the gable, went to the back corner of the gable, along the back of the cottage, and turned back across the opposite, the far end gable, and then were pointing me along the road to where there was another standing stone. So what happened then, at some time later, after I'd been there for a few years, a man of the most eccentric ever-looking couple who appeared outside my cottage. He asked me if I knew how ancient the cottage was. I informed him of the dowsing, the energy lines leading around the cottage and through the door and into the kitchen and to the standing stone. He informed me that it was not the standing stone the energy line was going, but to a chalybeate well. I asked them in for a cup of tea. He told me that the cottage had in fact been the Parliament building for the secular community attached to the 6th century church, 7th century church, I think it would be. I think it was the 600s. For the next hour and a half, he dropped in and out of trance in poetry, prose, and song, interpreting the meaning of my paintings, which I had hanging on the walls, which had been inspired by dreams, and interpreting a dream I had had 10 years prior to leaving mainstream architectural practice, where I was an uncomfortable fit, in the hope of discovering that I might be creative through personally rebuilding the stones of an absolutely ruinous 800-year-old mill steading and building a small architectural practice against all sense in terms of the level of fears and the lack that I had at that time. The dream had alluded to the level of difficulties I would encounter as a salmon crossing a shallow river, where in places it was difficult to breathe, but where in the end I reached the far bank. He told me about my coming to the area and about the trials I had come through and how I would be part of a spiritual renewal starting in Scotland, in Glasgow, and explained the journey of the salmon across the river and how in Celtic mythology, in reaching the far bank, the salmon turned into a white hawk which flew as a messenger between heaven and earth. Since first finding the location of my dreams, a mile from where I was rebuilding my ruin and close to where I had my second client, and then so quickly facing so many difficulties, which continued through 20 years, extreme difficulty, I'd wondered the dream that I'd had 10 years before was warning me. It was then after 20 years from being there, 30 years from the dream, that I knew it was meant, because the meaning of the name Gavin is the white hawk. Broken at that time, I'd lost everything, and I was suffering from PTSD, and my concentration levels were 10 minutes at the most. I'd reached the meaning of my name and the purpose of my life. So the other thing which happened when I met Rossi in person at the workshop where he trained us all in our method, he asked us to use our arms to explore our issues and our resources. Not the hands, the arms do just as well. Lifting up your arms and then slowly reducing one to find out, to the thigh, to find out what your issues are, your challenges are, and then allowing the next arm to slowly fall to the opposite thigh to find out what your resources are. He asked us what we'd each been finding, and I hadn't fitted in with the general number of people, and I eventually summed up courage, because I felt very insecure amongst this gathering of 80, 90 psychotherapists from all over Britain and Europe, that so I wasn't so sure, and so I ventured to him that I'd found that I had so many issues and so many resources. And it was that point that he stared at me in the same way as in the dream 7 years earlier he had stared at me. And he said to me fixedly, so many issues, so many resources, so much creativity. So that is where it comes to the close of what I've worked out. I've got a few things to show you as illustrations of how cell memory has taken me forward. So Damien is sorting something out at the moment.
Okay. Email.
Right.
Just check.
Am I still visible, or is the screen still visible? It doesn't matter if I'm visible or not, but it's the screen. Is it that visible?
Yes, let me just check. Right,
Just bear with us. Damien's working it through.
no, it's not coming through. Let's have a look. Let's go back to Zoom. And share screen. Start broadcast. Right, hopefully that's it.
Right.
Yes.
Damien's hopeful that we've
Yes.
reached through the technical aspects of things. Is it there?
Yep.
Right. This sketch that you see here is of a dream that I had in going to Greenland, South Greenland, when life was about to close on me after these 20 years. And what the dream is showing is a man who's been crushed, whose head's been crushed between the mountains. And his tears are flowing from his eyes and down from. What happens in the dream is the tears, and I call this sketch the Sea of Crying. And what was happening in the dream was this sea, which came from my tears, was filling with fish, and birds were diving to feed their young, and boats were trawling for the fish. And out on towards the horizon with the hills behind, there was a dolphin standing upended on its tail. So that's what I worked from. How do we get to the next one? Right, so what you see is the actual rock carving. I'd never done one before. I felt a bit insecure about doing it. Who was I to mark my dream on somebody else's land? And I felt incredibly self-conscious. But you'll notice at the top of the rock, there's a darker patch with little bits of whites on it, and that is actually the stream that comes down over this waterfall. So I started on the tiniest of cracks. I had been given 2 chisels, a point chisel and a 1/2-inch chisel by a sculptor who lived across the road from where I was staying. And I worked at the tiniest crack in what was either gneiss or granite, the very fine-grained one. And I worked away. First of all, I took a mug full of water out of the stream. And when I'd done that, I felt that consciousness where I was working to the spirit of the river of life of Greenland. And so I had 4 squares of chocolate for my lunch, and I tapped away with my hammer, hoping that nobody would come anywhere near me. I'd gone way out the back of the town where I thought there would be nobody. But my tapping brought people to me, and I cowered because I felt, well, I'd been used to so much criticism earlier in my life, which was still, the self-critic was very strong in me. And they said, if this is your first one, then you're doing well, keep going. And they came back different times, and there was Inuits, Danish settlers, and a Scotsman. And the conversation turned around to the meaning of life, the meaning of spirit, and where in Greenland, the dead were buried in the center of the community so that their spirit could be with the village, the settlement. In Denmark, it's different, and in Scotland, it's different. Scotland, we park cemeteries often far out of communities. So anyway, in the end, I had to leave. This rock carving, it's about 6 foot wide and about 9 foot in height, going up over the rock to the top of the head. What interested me was the head that I did. It wasn't like my dream, but it changed into something which picked out an aspect of the Inuit. And on the evening before leaving, the family was invited for a meal. And in the course of the meal, where they were speaking Greenlandic, which is nothing like Danish, of which I have a smattering, and nothing like English, there was something going on where, and something was being passed around the table, and the women elders, the Inuit women elders, were doing something with this thing that was being passed around. And once it had been passed around the table, it was presented to me. And it's one of the most precious possessions I have, if not the most precious possession. It was given to me in return for my doing this carving on the rock. When I was doing the rock carving, having never done it before, what happened as I tapped away was I felt I had a communication to the core of the earth, that it understood all what I'd been through, and it accepted all my tears. So this is, I'll show you afterwards what they gave me, because it won't come up immediately. But then the next one that comes up, so that's done, that does that. And so this is, I had to say goodbye to the man in Greenland in the rock. The tears were pretty close to the surface. The whole process had meant so much to me. And what I'd actually done was my experience mirrored, you could talk about mirror neurons, the experience of the Inuits having been settled by the Danes, who had taken all power away from them, had taken all the resources and had administered to them, and where their society had broken down from being a vital society, living on the edge of nature, into the severity of their location, but where they had a pride and where they had skills. And instead, what happened, they were given a Danish unemployment benefit, brought in from their communities into a small number of towns in precast concrete, assembled panelled houses, which were shipped out from Denmark, paid the Danish unemployment benefit, which was 90% of earnings, nothing to spend money on except alcohol, and the other beers, Danish beers, which are shipped in vast numbers, where the supermarkets, the two supermarkets, if you could call them that, they were really full of beer and spirits with practically nothing in the way of fresh vegetables. It was quite something. So in some ways, going there, I was tuning in to their situation, where they were able to tune into my situation. So I'd left my man behind and couldn't take him on the helicopter and the aeroplane. And you'll see in the stream, you see the head that I'd cut into the rock, prominent above. To the left, there's a hill behind, and a little, what is a flame. And that is what I'd done on my 50th birthday, when everything was dreadful, and where every day was misery. But I worked as best I could. And I went up this hill to do an installation with rocks. My idea was overambitious, and it fell dark very quickly. As I got up, there was so much grass. I'd hoped to do my installation further down, but it was up near the top that I did it. And I pitched the tent. There was snow lying on the ground, and I put some snow in a mug so that it would melt if I had it beside me, so that I had something to drink in the morning. And I spent the next little bit of time finding stones and starting to build them, but I wasn't really getting anywhere with them. I couldn't see what it was. And in particular, nature had deposited huge lumps of stone, 10 feet long, 2 to 3 feet square, all round about. And I chose a spot which was sheltered by 2 of these recumbent stones. And to start, it just begged me. When I got to the point where I pitched the tent, I knew this was the spot where I had to do this installation. It was so cold that the wind just cut through the tent like a razor across my face. But I know that I did sleep for a little bit, because I had a dream of how I was to continue with building the stones. It was a shape which both flowed up and flowed down. And when I'd finished doing it, I stood up on the 2 big stones that I'd spoken about earlier and looked down on it, and I could see what it was, and it was a flame. And this was the flame that I could see through the Velix roof light of the house that I'd restored. And it spoke to me in a way which I would never, ever have expected. And it still speaks to me today. It's like the eternal flame of spirit, which keeps you going through whatever difficulties there are. And if you stay with it, you'll come out stronger at the end. So the painting gathers things together which I couldn't bring together. It was the first large painting, full-size sheet of paper that I'd ever done. And I made lots of mistakes. It's watercolor, it's unforgiving. But despite all the things which I did wrong, it still, to me, stands as a painting, which, when I see it now and again, fills me with a sense which is just fantastic. Life was so difficult. But at that point, in 1997, I'd gone to an evening class at the School of Art here in Glasgow. And that's where I met Heather. And I got the sense from conversations with her a few times that when I asked a question, she didn't reply in a normal sense at all. And I got the sense that somehow she was a healer or a therapist who might understand where I was in my life and what I was going through. So I asked her if she would have a look at my painting, which I then brought through. And I really wanted to know whether I was losing my sanity or whether I was okay. So under the lights of Sauchiehall Street, I showed her the painting, and she assured me that I wasn't losing my sanity. And then I asked her if I could run her back anywhere, and it was to the Phoenix Centre. And so, in a way, my dreams had connected me to the person who has meant so much in my life ever since. So that's the first. So we then move on to another set, another email, or is it just to put done or something on that? No, wait a minute. Yeah, here we go. So this painting is from at least a couple of dreams. This bird, Trotsky, he was the cockerel where I kept hens behind the cottage that I was in, after I'd lost my home and studio, which had been shown on Channel 4, along with a lot of celebs. I was the non-celeb in the programme. And this cockerel had been a very decent cockerel, but had grown very greedy. And so he was taking all the food for the hens, rather than giving the food to the hens, as cockerels usually do, showing them where the food is. He was taking all their food. So I was spreading the feed around so the cockerel didn't get any, so the hens could get some. And this bird got very angry with me and charged me. And I protected myself by lifting up my foot, which that was all I was doing, was really trying to protect myself. But as this bird hit it, it went up 30, 40 feet into the air and fluttered down and sulked in the corner of the garden. And somehow we struck up a conversation. Of course, it was imaginary, and I knew it was imaginary, where we insulted each other. And then, after insulting each other a lot, decided we needed to grow up a bit, be a bit more adult. And then, in some ways, we each mentored the other. So this is a phantom cockerel, which was then incorporated in my dream, landing on my shoulder, having broken out the top part of the painting, the bars of the cell that it was imprisoned in, where in effect is my dream, where I had been imprisoned. And the suit of this man who has a mug for a head, which again is me, but the suit somehow was to do with my art teacher at school, who told me I could do art. And my dream was pointing me, as was Heather, to doing my art. But the dream was also pointing out to me that I was a mug, that I was only using a small part of my head and not really using my brain. So dreams are absolutely fantastic at breaking through and telling you what you need to know. So that's that one. And then we go to the next one, tap on it. So this painting was...
Oh, no, sorry.
Just bear with it for Damien sorts out. Yeah, so this painting, Heather was going to an art group. There were two very fine artists as tutors, and they ran a summer school on Gia. And so we went there and camped at the north end of Gia. And we had to do a painting for an exhibition. And this is what my mind conjured up for me. I'd been reading about Odysseus, and I was pretty pissed off because Odysseus had got back to Ithaca, I think, after so many years. And here was me, still at sea, with still a whole load of challenge. So I decided it was time to bring Odysseus, or my Odysseus, ashore. So this painting shows the storms that I'd been through, that I'd been virtually crucified. You can see that in the middle, just underneath the sail, the tattered sails. And this, the prow of the boat, is my friend Trotsky, bringing me ashore with a bloodied head, with the blood going down onto the sand. And I felt quite pleased with that because it had been so difficult for me all through my life to really break out, to express myself for fear of being put down. So I felt that this was both art and a sense of moving forward in my life. So that's that one. And so that goes done. And then this is, so we tap on this one. So this last painting is actually quite recent, from a few months ago. I've really been struggling to pull things together. I was being too tentative, too frightened that I was going to fail, get things wrong. Painting a little bit curtailed at the bottom. But this painting started to take shape, and I knew it was something, and it gripped me, and I knew I wasn't to allow it to slip away. And so, having finished the painting, I think it is good art. I think it expresses a period of my life which I'm now moving from. To me, looking at the painting, there's a level of sadness in it, of maybe grief, looking back at things. But having done it, I was so excited that I actually had it in me to be creative as a painter and to be alive, that I had a right to be alive. So 75 years it's taken me. And since then, my art has opened up in new ways, new colors, new shapes, new forms. I don't know where it goes, but if we do engage in creativity of any kind, whatever is, because we are all born creative, we all have this creative facility in us, we can reach to a different sense of who we are and have effects in the world. So, what? Yes, I'm just stopping. So Heather is giving me a reminder that I need to stop. But I was actually at that point. She's very good at that, as well as being very good at other things. Right, so that's it.
Shall we give you, so let's open the floor up for any questions. So if you have anything to say, just unmute yourself. And
yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yes, please.
okay, Mishka, fire away.
Gavin needs to show us the piece that he was given, which I've seen at the door of the TS, but he hasn't shown us it tonight.
Right, no, I'll show it to you now.